Okay, let's start. It's 2 o'clock here in Amsterdam, so we are going to start with this webinar. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the IMA's Women Leadership Series. And today we have a very diverse group present. I see attendees from across Europe and beyond even. We have members joining us from the Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Turkey, Dubai, the United States, and I also see them from India and many more places. It's great to see the international network of IMA in action. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. In a world of shifting economic and social challenges, it's important that we recognize the unique contributions of every individual and cultivate working places where people of all backgrounds are valued and affirmed. Today, we have a dialogue with two panelists, and we will discuss how to create a positive, bias-free workplace culture. We will also cover issues such as how to recognize and contend with conscious and unconscious bias as a leader, and address bias from an HR perspective, including how to detect and mitigate bias. And of course, also how to create and nurture corporate leaders who are committed to a bias-free working environment. And of course, they also share their own success stories as they address bias within their own organizations and ultimately emerge as a better, stronger leader. And if you have any questions for the panelists, please ask them via the chat function on your screen during the webinar. And then I will read out loud the questions also live in the webinar. And I will do my best, of course, to cover them all. My name is Lam Mulder, and I'm the Senior Director, Europe Operations at IMA, the Institute of Management Accountants. But let me now first introduce you to the panelists, and then I will start with Femke. Femke is a board member and CFO at NEN, the Royal Netherlands Standardization Institute. Hi, Femke, great having you here. How are you?
Hi, Ellen. Thank you. I'm great. How are you?
I'm also great. Thank you. And maybe a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Yes, you do. We do that first. OK.
Let's
do that then. OK. Well, first of all, welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm very honored to be here. As Ellen said, my name is Femke Aerts. That is a typical Dutch name. I'm also Dutch. I live in the Netherlands together with my Swiss husband, and we have two grown kids. They are both studying in Amsterdam and they also live there. So we moved a little bit more south and we now live close to the Belgium border in a city called Etteleur. At the moment, we are renovating our house and when we are not working or helping with the renovation, we love to be outdoors. That could be either hiking or cycling or even motorcycling. And I also love to cook for my family and friends and read a lot of books, fiction and non-fiction. Business-wise, as Ellen said, I'm a member of the executive board of the Royal Dutch Standardization Institute, and I'm also the CFO of the company. In this case, it means that I oversee business development, our digital platform, the innovation, IT, facilities, HR, marketing, communication, public affairs, international affairs, and of course, finance. And besides that, I'm also a member of the supervisory board of Avans University and of two NGOs. One is Fair Work, that is an NGO against modern slavery and human trafficking, and Rutgers, that is an NGO for sexual and reproductive health and rights. And today's topic is one close to my heart, because I think that inclusivity and equality are something that goes without saying, and it goes without saying, thankfully, in my family and among my close friends, but it still isn't something that it's naturally, not even in my country and not even in the countries that score high on the indexes on inclusivity and equality, like the Scandinavian countries. And that really annoys me, because it goes without saying that an inclusive and equal society and workspace benefits us all. Even though I truly believe in inclusivity and equality, I also find it difficult to sustainable change our organization and make inclusivity and equality part of our DNA. So if I can help anyway to pave the path, I love to help. And I'm also on the lookout for great ideas and good advice from all of you. So thank you. Back to you, Alan.
Great, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Kobe, you're talent acquisition lead at Getir. Welcome as well, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Alan. For my intro, I need to go back a little bit. So I always start with I'm originally from Ghana. Ghana is obviously a country in Africa. We relocated to the Netherlands when I was 11 years old with 3 siblings. So I grew up in a female household for sure. Did my education in the Netherlands, and I have a degree in human resources. So that's been my core majority of my experience for the last 21 years. I fell in love with talent acquisition because, when you can make an impact for any organization, the people team or the talent acquisition team plays a very important role. I am based in the Netherlands. I'm married with my wife, who's also an HR professional. I got to know her during our studies. So I have a college sweetheart. Together we have 3 kids, which is a full house. And because of my background, I also find it very important to make sure that I speak up where is necessary and try and make an impact with diversity when it comes to hiring, but also echoing my voice. I think that representation is important. So the more people see, the more people can also believe that they can achieve. Welcome everybody who made time to join, and I'm looking forward to having a great discussion with Femke and Ella.
Great, thank you so much. Also, very nice introduction. Yeah, let's first maybe set out the context, and also to all the attendees, if you have a question, feel free to send it via the chat, and then I will try to squeeze it in, of course, during our discussion. But let's first set the context. What we all know that the events of 2020 have sparked greater awareness of biases that prevail in society. But to set the context, what is bias and where does it come from? Colby, Femke?
Yeah, Femke, you want to start or do you want me to start?
Doesn't matter, Kobe.
Okay. So, from my perspective, bias is, how you look at things and obviously having a preference for that. And what you see, in my opinion, is, people who have typically, especially in the TA world, when you are well-traveled, obviously you have a different point of view or more point of view, and that can help in any situation that you are potentially in. So I believe that, having a preference is, and it could be positive, is a bias, and having a world perspective helps bring that bias down. At least that's how I look at it.
Mm-hmm. And you, Femke?
Yeah, I fully agree with Kobe. I think that it's important that a bias is something that is often learned, and it is highly dependent on variables like a person's socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, educational background, gender, sexual orientation, etc. And as Kobe said, some biases are positive and helpful, like, for example, choosing to eat only food that is considered healthy, or staying away from someone who has knowingly caused harm. But biases are often based on stereotypes rather than actual knowledge of an individual or a circumstance. And whether positive or negative, such shortcuts can result in prejudgments that can lead to rash decisions or even discriminatory practices. And at the individual level, bias can negatively impact someone's personal and professional relationships. And at a society level, it can lead to unfair persecution of a group, such as, well, for example, the Holocaust or slavery. But it's also good to understand that unconscious bias, you have to also appreciate it, because it's also natural human behavior, because we are programmed to survive. And as such, the brain is constantly assessing the world around us, processing visual, behavioral, and verbal signs and signals, and using them to assess danger, risk, and opportunity. So we can do something about it, but it's also part of us at the same time.
Indeed. And how do these biases affect the talent pool, and what impact does it have within the workplace, do you think?
I think that biases affects us and our decision-making process in a number of different ways, because it affects our perception, how we see people and perceive reality. It affects our attitude, how we react towards certain people, our behaviors, how receptive we are, or towards friends or towards other people. Also our attention, so which aspects of a person we pay most attention to, the listening skills, the micro-affirmations. It's just a lot that affects it.
Mhm.
And if you're not conscious about it, you can make just the wrong decisions. And it can also affect the moral and the overall experience of workers in an organization. But I think that Kobe can tell us more about that because he's an HR professional.
Well, Femke, you mentioned all the right things. I think, when you look at talent, what I challenge businesses on and teams on is, are we looking at different areas that we potentially might not have looked at because of, all the elements that Femke mentioned. So I do think that, if you want to alleviate the biases in a recruitment process or in a talent process, you need to start somewhere different than what you have been doing normally. And that's why I also believe in having a diverse team. It brings different perspective. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means that we may not have considered an element because we didn't have somebody with that representation in the room. So I'm all about that. And I also find it very important to, be brave and challenge, your managers or your hiring manager from that perspective, because is I believe, having a bias and noticing it sparks a conversation. And from that conversation, we can lead to a place where we can be maybe much more better off. That's how I look at it when it comes to the talent pool.
Yeah, and do you maybe have an example from in your own company, from maybe people who were not open that they might have a bias or something?
Yeah, I mean, in the recruitment space, it often happens that you need to challenge your hiring manager. What I've learned is that, and I think Femke mentioned it in her intro as well, you need to know the other person. You need to know the other individual. Where are they coming from? Why do they have a strong belief in a certain element? So as a result of that, if you know somebody well, you will be a little bit more receptive to that, right? Also, in my intro, I mentioned that I'm a political refugee. Typically, or 5 years ago, I was not mentioning that, right? But because I mentioned that, some people think, oh, I didn't even know that you were a political refugee. Well, does it really matter? Not really, but because they know me as an individual and my background, it makes them a little more receptive to maybe my point of view or the challenges that I'm facing. So that is something that is definitely very, very educational. And I can give you another example. My wife is an HR professional, and she's white. So we are into interracial relationship. And she always needs to share this with her board or with her general manager that, her driving our car, she never gets stopped. But I have been stopped a few times driving our car. And obviously that's very frustrating because of the perception out there. But also when you go into an interview as, a minority, sometimes people don't understand how hard you actually, or how you did your best to actually be invited to that conversation. So that comes with an extra burden. So that is just opening people's eyes in the corporate settings to let them understand what somebody is going through, because they have maybe not experienced that.
Yeah, great. And it's a very good example. And one of the things I was also reading in the newspaper is more regarding microaggressions. So for example, in an inclusive workspace, that are team meetings and they make a joke about another minority. And then when a minority is complaining about it, then they say, okay, what are you complaining about? It was just a joke. How harmful is that for an inclusive organization?
Very harmful, very harmful. Fortunate enough, I've had a few different trainings when it comes to that and spotting that. But it also, sometimes the individual who's been offended, they cannot speak up maybe in that moment. So it's up to the rest to speak up on their behalf, especially when they're noticing it. Because it just brings people down. And obviously you want to be in an environment where you feel appreciated. Because on the other way, on the flip side, if somebody makes a joke which is not appreciated, you also hear about it. So that's my point of view when it comes to that.
Yeah, Yeah, good one. Maybe there's already a takeaway. It's very early in the webinar, but that's maybe already a takeaway. That's how we can help our teammates to say something about it when you see that happening. Indeed. But we see, for example, we are all here in the Netherlands. That the Netherlands, for example, rose 7 places to the rank 31st among 156 countries in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report from last year. However, globally, the gap increased. What initiatives and practices can we collectively implement to break the bias and advance women's progress? And are there any existing policies in place focusing on closing the gender gap?
A lot of questions in a question.
Indeed, yes, I was well prepared for that.
Very good. I'll just give it a go, and then I'll give the floor to Gobi. Well, I think that the first step is simple and not simple, because it's make the unconscious bias conscious. And that means that we need to understand that it is a bias, that we are aware of it. And if we are aware of the conscious and or the bias, and that is quite difficult, because I have learned that there are quite a few different types of biases. So to be able to recognize all those kind of biases is actually quite difficult, and you need to train for it and be alert to it, and do it together with your colleagues, so that you can learn from each other. And if you are able to make the unconscious bias conscious, then we are able to try to mitigate those. And I think we have already a few instruments, so you say, to help us to mitigate the unconscious bias. Like we have different methods for objective personal decisions and talent management, like blind evaluation or structured recruitment and performance evaluations. And there's also a lot more transparency and accountability. There's a lot more data we can use, so you can reveal the bias and the gaps that are there. We also have a lot of trainings, and I agree with Kobe that you have to start with the leaders and then work your way down to all the employees. But we need to do all those kind of things. And for me, those are kind of instrumental. And the thing is that our goal is to make inclusivity and equality in our DNA. So there, for me, there's still a gap between all the instruments we are trying to use, and we do that to our best, but it's still not in our DNA. So we need something extra, and I don't have the solution for that quite yet, but maybe some of you have great ideas.
Yeah, what I would add to that is I do believe it starts with the leaders. Leaders within organizations need to have a mindset, and that mindset is very important.
Kobe, there's a little bit of an echo on your side, I think.
Oh,
now it's better.
Okay.
Yeah, now it's good.
I believe that I still have like an echo. Why is that? I believe that is the leaders within the organization who need to take a point of view, how they see inclusivity within the organization. So that's first and foremost, because if you trickle down within your organization, there are going to be a lot of people making a lot of efforts, but if the leaders don't believe in the change, it's not going to happen. And I do believe that it could be incremental. So there are a lot of companies and assessment tools out there to feel the temperature within your organization first, right? And then based on that, you can say, okay, what do we think is important for us to tackle? You cannot tackle everything. And what Femke mentioned is that if it has to do an element of your talent pool, how can you address that? If it has to do with, how do we make sure that we improve promotion or even having women leadership within your organizations, how do we do that? How can we make sure that we are, taking steps in improving? I believe if an organization is open-minded and wants to take the steps, you can get there. But you need your leaders to be on board. You need your leaders to believe, and you need your leaders to also hold people accountable. And that's one of the elements that I've seen, is that if you have a leader, in my two previous company, one of the co-founders was very adamant about being an inclusive company, and he put actually his money where his mouth was. And you could really see the difference and the change that as a result of that, everything that we did, he asked the question, are we inclusive enough? Are we diverse enough? Do we have enough point of view? So that is something constant, I think, that everybody can also do from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, great. And so you also have discussions about legislations that companies need to be more transparent about how they are paying their employees. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's how do you call it? Something that is very challenging for companies, depending on the phase of the maturity level. I believe, and that's something that one of my old managers told me, when you give people a pay raise, you need to make sure that you have a consistent story, right? You cannot have different storyline while you're doing something. So if a company has a consistent storyline, how they approach compensations or benefit, it doesn't matter, if it's male, female, you should be able to have a consistent approach to that. I'm a strong believer in at least asking the question. Also for the females listeners joining us today, it's a simple question based on how we pay our employees. Am I getting a compensation which is aligned with my peers and the value that I bring to the company? That's an ask. It doesn't mean that you're going to get it, but at least you can ask that question. And then if you find out that that's not the case and you've asked, then obviously that will bring more alarm bells. So that is, something that is, I would say, it depends on the mature level of the company and if they can be consistent in the approach.
Yeah, good one. And should initiative come from the employer or from the employee for pay raises? Because, for example, people in sales are maybe more reaching out to their manager for a pay raise than from other departments. What do you think?
I think it's up to the company to dictate what an individual's contribution is to the company. Obviously, there's enough performance cycle that goes around to also make adjustment when that's needed. I'm a firm believer is that your manager or your leader should spot the talent and your added value. You should not always fighting for that. If you want a situation where you are always fighting for that, at least make it a discussion point and see how you can, over time, because sometimes it's very challenging to improve immediately, but over time, get where you feel you are showing, the company showing you your value and your worth. I know Femke has definitely one or two things to add here.
Yes, well, one or two, because I agree with what you're saying. I think it's very important that companies have a consistent story about the wages and the benefits, and that they can explain it if necessary. And I think that is really important. I agree also that the initiative should be more with the employer than with the employees. Because I think that would be very healthy. Yes, I think I actually cannot add something else, Kobe, because you were very, very elaborate.
Just as an example, through sources, I heard that Gen increased people's salary by almost €1,000 based on inflation and looking at their benefits within the company. And it didn't matter if you just joined the company or if you're part of the company for the last 2 or 3 or 5 years. So that is, I think, is a bold statement from a company to treat people equally, no matter how long they've been with the company.
Yeah.
Correct.
And also you see much more initiatives now in the Netherlands that if there's like a raise, usually there's at least in the Netherlands, the pay raise usually is a percentage. But nowadays you see much more, not a percentage, but like a fixed amount. So that especially the people with the lower incomes, gain more than the people with the higher incomes. So you see some things are changing, but it's an incremental process that we need to cherish, but we also need to make sure it moves forward.
This is a great example, and let's go to the chat as well. I will read it out. There's one person who also needs some advice. I will read it out. A female sales rep was in a meeting with a male colleague in a room full of male customers. Pizza was delivered for the lunch meeting. The man looked at the lone female in the room to serve lunch. She didn't want to cause an issue in front of customers to serve lunch. Is there something she could have done? She was angry about serving lunch, but did not know what else to do.
Boy, I think that happened to me quite a few times. And depending on the circumstances, at least with customers there, I would probably just serve the pizza with a smile, but ask the colleague to have a conversation afterwards. And depending on the relationship with the customers, if it is a very warm relationship, I might even make a joke about it and dare him to serve the pizza. But it depends. It depends on the circumstances, to be honest, for me at least.
Yeah, and now I'll add here is that if your male colleague was much more conscious, he would have said something prior to even the meeting starting. Because that's how you make sure you include people than exclude them.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, I think this is indeed a classic example. So let's go to another question. Does equal opportunity contradicts inclusivity in a sense that if I force inclusivity, it will disrupt equal opportunity?
Wow. Yes and no, to be honest. Because that's also a discussion in the Netherlands. At the moment, we have, for example, we have a quotum on females in board functions. And people ask me, are you in favor of it or not? And the thing is, in a different situation, I would not have been a favorite of this regulation. But nowadays, I think it's necessary to make sure that we become more equal, at least in the Netherlands. And then we need measures that are in its nature not equal. That's a bit weird of saying things, but I hope you understand.
Yeah, true. And now it's indeed for listed companies in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one from the attendees. How often do others encounter chauvinistic remarks? For example, that the boss says he's concerned about how you raise your children because you are too ambitious. Wow. Or that female bosses are particularly demanding of women.
I think it happens to be quite honest, in the environment. And I would say that, the last couple of years, I've been much more privileged in certain situations. So you hear a little bit more of that. Obviously, I can just say how I would approach it because for everybody it's a little bit different. But I'm very cautious about the impact it has on individuals when you hear things like that. So I would potentially pull, this individual maybe aside and say, hey, this remark, do you understand how it could come across? Because sometimes, and I've spoken to a few people who have received remarks, and it can go on for weeks, that remarks in their head. And it's sometimes very difficult to shake. So sometimes people don't really understand the impact that some remarks may have. And then it goes back into educating them, hey, how this may reflect on other people. That would be my answer.
Yeah, I think that I experienced quite a few of those remarks when I was moving up the career ladder. And the funny thing was that in the beginning, I thought that the people were thinking for me. Like, do you want this opportunity now when you have a young family? Or do you understand that this opportunity requires more than regular hours? And to be honest, in my earlier years, I addressed these with explanations, how I organized things at home, so that there wasn't any threat in giving me the new opportunity. And I also worked extra hard to prove that I was up to the challenge. But the funny thing was, when I realized that a few years later, that I was working within the system that I thought was wrong. So I started to challenge the system, so to say. I tried and still try to address the unconscious bias and have a conversation about that, just as Kobe was saying. And I also try to be alert about my own unconscious bias and be a sponsor or a coach for people who could use it. So I wasn't perfect. I'm still not perfect, but I learn every day and I try to do something with it.
Good one. So actually also tell your colleagues how you are managing everything. That's also important, you mean? Great. We don't have any questions from the public anymore, so feel free to send any questions. And there it is. That's really quick. Let's do one question from the public and then go to the other one. When shifting to another organization, what will be a good question to ask in interviews on how inclusive a company is? I think that's a really good question.
I just asked that question, what their policy is, how inclusive they are, if they have numbers about it, is it something that is in the annual report? You can ask all different kind of questions. Just ask them, I would say.
Yeah, and maybe also emphasize if that's very important to you, right? So because everybody may have a different perception when it comes to the inclusiveness. Is it promotion? Is it, you know, being able to speak up? You can also mention like, hey, this element is very important to me. How does the company deal with that? And then obviously see how they react. But I also believe that sometimes it's very important to also check with people already working at the company to get some insights around that. I mean, we all have been through interview processes where you meet, you know, at least maybe 3 or 4 people. What I'm always trying to look for is the consistency in the message that I'm receiving. So is everybody telling me something consistent? Of course, and I'm trying to improve my, let's say, stock in terms of, you know, my knowledge of the organization. I believe, you know, when you go into an interview, you know what you are going to do maybe for 60%. And every step of the way, you're trying to increase that percentage. And by increasing that percentage, you're also trying to understand what people are telling you and looking for the consistency messages.
Yeah, good one. But there can also be, of course, there are maybe some companies who are not diverse at all and who want to become diverse. So for them, it's challenging, of course, because if people are looking for a diverse company, that's not what they are going to find. Yeah,
but then it's clear that they're not diverse at the moment,
that
they would like to take some steps and are even looking for you to contribute, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd rather join a company who's transparent about it than a company who's not transparent about it.
That's a good one. Great, and let's go to the next one. There's a long question, so be prepared. In 2021, the proportion of women in leadership role within the financial services firms was at 24% and is only projected to grow to 28% by 2030, which is still below parity. That's according to a study carried out by Deloitte, which also revealed the gap between women in executive roles and women in senior leadership roles currently stands at 9%. This clearly states that if we don't ramp up our efforts now, the gap will widen. What do you perceive as the challenges to achieving parity, and what can be done to change things both at an individual and organizational level?
That's a good question. Femke?
And a strong one also. If I'm being honest, for me, it starts with the unconscious bias. You have to know what it is, you have to recognize it, you have to address it, and you have to mitigate it. So I think training will help, but inclusivity and equality must be an intrinsic motivation. It has to be in our DNA. So some people in the Netherlands now say, well, we have a tight labor market, so it will come naturally. I don't think so. I think we have to work on it actively and constantly. And we could also use more evidence that inclusivity and equality are a source of competitive advantage, and specifically also an enabler of growth. And as we said before, transparency and accountability are really important. But also more transparency about what works and what are good and bad examples, and accountability. Well, it can be done like in the form of the periodical reports, but also in well, on television, you know, in sports, in music, in all things can be good examples. So we have to be surrounded by good examples. Maybe a good example, not at the moment, politics. That should be that could be a very powerful example.
Yeah, and I think what I can echo as well is that you need to make those steps to get obviously increase that number. One of the examples, one of my previous companies is that we had, I believe, 6 female leadership, 6 female in you know, C-level positions. Compared to the rest of the organization, still a small number. But what they did is that they really empowered young talent, young female talent, to hear all the inspirational stories of leaders and up-and-coming leaders, to create much more examples. Because I also believe if you don't see it around you, then it's very difficult to imagine. And what I really liked is, you know, all the leadership, and I'm talking about the chief marketing officer, I'm talking about, you know, the senior vice president, that kind of level, sharing their journey, their stories, their challenges, their pushbacks, how they fought through it, but also stepping up in mentoring others from that perspective. I mean, myself, I have 2 mentors. I have a male and a female mentor. You know, that's just giving different perspective. And I believe that those are small steps that you can definitely take, but it's a journey. You're not going to get there quick enough. But I do believe, you know, if everybody has that mindset and are willing to push the boundaries, we will get there for sure.
Yeah, yes. Good one. And no, go ahead, Femke.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that from my personal experience, I have a few national and international intervision groups with female executives, and I had sponsors when I was a lot younger, and I'm mentoring females now who have the ambition, and I help them to first of all with their development, but also with advice how to tackle a bias and how to smoothen their career paths. Mm-hmm. So that can definitely help.
Yeah, great. And also because we are very transparent, maybe not, we discussed the male-female ratio. Maybe it's nice to mention it within IMA. We have the global board of directors. Femke is going to join it as well in a short time. There it's 50-50 indeed. So I think that's something where all the members can be very proud of.
So it's possible, Alain. It is possible.
Mm-hmm, indeed. So it's very good to work for such a company indeed. And then there's a remark, maybe you can also read it. I know that's always a discussion in the Netherlands, so I'm happy to hear your opinion about it. She is saying that typically in the Netherlands, women often do not want to work full-time. That can prevent them to grow. What do you think?
Yes and no. Yes, it can sometimes be hard to make a career to the C-level if you are only willing to work 2 or 3 days a week. That could be. But I have had one position where I had a duo leadership. So 2 women that was at the national government. So that might be a more typical organization that is open to it. But those were 2 females who were working 3 days a week, both. And they had 1 day overlap, and they joined a function, and it was a senior management role. So it can be done, but it's not common, and a lot of companies are not open to it. But I think it could be possible. Why not? We are experimenting at the moment in our company, but that's, to be honest, on the lower level management. So the first level, so not senior management level. But we just have to I think we can learn from that. And it is true that in the Netherlands, the participation of women is lower than throughout Europe. People hope that that more women are willing to work when childcare is becoming free. So hopefully that helps. It would be great, I think. But I'm curious, Kobe, have some thoughts on this issue? Probably yes.
Yeah. I mean, and this is maybe a few years ago, maybe 6, 8 years ago. It was very challenging for me to present female talent who were working 4 days a week, and they were actually working 4 days a week at their then current company. So I had to fight to make sure that I can share their resumes with hiring managers, and had conscious decision. Luckily for us, back then we were also moved buildings, and we're in between buildings. When you buy a new house, but you still have the old house, and you have to figure out how to go back and forth. And it was very interesting with that situation. It created, at least for 6 months, where flexibility actually happened. So managers could not see the employees because some people were at one building and some people moved to another building. And that created actually an organic flexibility. So as a result of that, they were like, oh, we actually exercised that it was actually possible for people to work a little bit less and not physically see them. And it took off. So sometimes something needs to happen, or something needs to be created to convince. And I believe same as working from home. I mean, a long time ago, working from home was Kobe was home. He is working, but don't disturb him. That was what working from home meant, right? Now, working from home means you are physically home. You are still part of an organization doing all the different meetings. You just have to be a little bit mindful in terms of your time. If you really need to block time out, then you block those time out. So I think we've also adjusted to that new reality. And that's something that I also think that can happen when it comes to, working 32 hours. I also got a hard time when I requested parental leave and working, I believe, 36 hours even. It was like, really, do you want to do that? I was like, yeah, because, taking care of my kids is also very important for me. So I think it's possible.
A good one. And then we also have a nice question from Danique for both you and for you, Kobe and Femke. Do you really think that reporting about diversity and equality has a positive impact on inclusion? She feels that it's more something that company need to do instead of aiming for cultural change.
I believe so. The reason why is that it shows some kind of accountability, I believe. And I think we all believe that accountability is a very important element, because otherwise you cannot hold people against that. So once you hold people against that, then it becomes a habit, hopefully, and then it becomes much more natural. That will be my take on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kobe. I think accountability is really important. And I think this is just one of the ingredients that can help. It's not the ingredient. It's not the most important ingredient. Accountability is an essential ingredient. And then this is one way to fulfill that ingredient.
Yeah, great. And how can men as colleagues, manager, leader help break the bias and promote inclusivity and equality for women?
Ooh, I think, well, for me, the first step would be that the men accept that they have a responsibility regarding inclusivity and equality. I think that's really important. And they also need to understand that they are one of the change agents. And then it's important that they also be aware of unconscious bias, know what it is, be able to recognize it, be brave enough to address it, be able to mitigate it. And I think it's important to also accept that it is not something with a simple solution that can be implemented and then it's fixed. Because it has inclusivity and equality are something that has to become part of our intrinsic motivation. So yeah, that's my take on it.
And I agree with what Femke said. The only thing I'll add to is, what is your personal story to drive change? So, for example, for me, it's having an ethical background and being in situations where I feel privileged because I'm the only one, and trying to help others also achieve that. So you need to have some kind of motivation and drive when it comes to that topic. Whether I want my daughter to also be, treated equally for opportunities, right? Or that I want my sons to respect their mom, same that they respect their female colleague in the workplace. So I believe everybody has to have their own personal story, how they would like to contribute to the change and making sure that we are all inclusive.
Yeah, good one. And we also have, maybe you can also read it, we have a question from Neha. She said that the leader recently told her that she would not prefer a woman for a high stake position because she might get pregnant. How do you respond to that if you see that in your company?
We need to find that leader.
Yeah, absolutely.
that would be my recommendation. But I think, and I've had it for twice now in my career, where I've even hired a female talent who was pregnant, was very transparent about it, gave birth, everything was fine, and then she came back and was a high performer. Those are the examples that you also want to highlight as well. But I believe that, if you believe, and it starts with the recruiter as well, if you believe that talent is going to add value to the company, think about all the people that we lose in a company compared to, one or few talents that can really help you propel. So yeah, we need to get rid of that guy.
I would say the same indeed. You, Femke?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we when we were on the lookout for a new company lawyer, there was this lady who was actually already pregnant, so a big belly, well, she was our best candidate, and we didn't doubt for a second not to hire her. So we actually hired her. She worked for 6 weeks and then she was on maternity leave. She came back and she is our best company lawyer ever. So I don't have any doubt hiring people who are pregnant or even people with a disability or whatever. You just have to look at the person, see if there's a match with the company, see what the person can add to the company. That's the most important thing, and not the gender or the background or how someone walks or talks or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for that. What learnings, maybe that's also for you, Femke, what learnings would you like to share with young women looking to follow in your footsteps?
Boy, I won't follow all my footsteps. Try to avoid a few if you can.
Imagine.
But to be honest, I think my first learning would be the same as my advice to men. And also be aware that it will take time before inclusivity and equality is in our DNA. My second advice would be don't accept it if there is inequality or not inclusivity. I think if you experience unconscious bias, be brave to address it. And if that is a step too far, then please talk to someone whom you can trust and who can help you. Because I know from a personal experience, some of those conversations aren't easy. So it can help and find help in preparing and evaluating. Also determine your own boundaries, have sponsors, have a coach, have a network that can help you, help each other, keep connecting, keep communicating. I said before, I have a national and an international peer-to-peer group with only females in it. And they really, we really help each other and we discuss situation. I also have a coach who can help me out if I need to. So make sure that you don't accept it and be able to do something about it with help. It's not a sign of weakness if you need help. It's not a sign of weakness. Please do.
Very good one. And for the people joining us, we have 10 minutes left. So if you have any questions still left, and this is your chance. Let's go to actually already the final questions. Where do you see the greatest opportunity for impact when it comes to breaking the bias and bringing inclusivity in the workplace? What do you hope for as the main takeaway from today's discussion?
Yeah, I can do that. I think for me, the most important thing is, creating awareness around the topic, educating yourself. Femke mentioned that there are so many different biases out there. Sometimes I don't even know all of them, but continue to educate yourself, continue to read around the topics. If you have any opportunity where you can, get more insight from people who have been doing it for a longer time, soak it all in. Also look for allies. I think allies are very important in different ERG groups in companies or externally. You can also have, ERG groups outside of your own company if your company doesn't have that, with people who have gone through different situations who can give you some insights and some support. And I do believe it's also very important to be able to amplify your voice. So if you encounter anything that you think is unfair, it doesn't help into an inclusive environment, either you take yourself out or you try steps to improve that. And I'm a true believer in, whatever occupation you have, you want to go to your occupation with your best self. So if your environment is not providing you to be your best self, then you can do two things, right? You can take yourself out of there, or you can drive change. That would be my suggestion.
Great. And you, Femke?
Yeah, I fully agree. It's quite a difficult question, to be honest, because I believe that we need to do different things at the same time in order to create an inclusive and equal workspace. It helps that we have an international and also a national agenda. At least in the Netherlands, we have a national agenda. And on the European level, we have an action plan. And on the international level, you have, of course, like the SDGs and other policies. It helps that we have evidence that inclusivity and equality benefit an organization, but we need more of it. It helps that we have data and we are more data-driven nowadays, but we need more data. It helps that organizations train employees and train especially the leaders. It helps if you as a person ask for that training. It helps that we have different methods for objective personal decisions and talent management. Also, transparency and accountability help. A tight labor market, it helps also a little bit. But what helps most is that we work on it actively and constantly, and that we help each other and that we speak up. And then I think step by step, it will become our DNA. And then we are successfully.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And then speak up. I hear that many times indeed during the webinar. I think that's a very important one indeed for everyone indeed. If there is still a question you want to ask, then this is your time because we just have a few minutes left. Then we are actually already, oh, that's more a remark. Excellent session. Love the insight from Kobe and Femke. Thank you so much, Regina. There are no questions anymore. Okay, great. Then actually with that, we have come to an end of this webinar. But if you are now thinking about doing this within your organization or to make it better within your organization, then IMA can help, of course. to further support our members and diversity and inclusion initiatives within the management accounting community, IMA has gathered its best internal practices and created the Diversity and Inclusion Jumpstart Kit to educate and guide organizations through D&I implementation. Please go to the link shared in the chat box at this moment to access the Jumpstart Kit and also to access all the other IMA diversity and inclusion resources. I can really recommend going there. It's really a great resource for everything within your company and to take it to the next level. It will be shared now in the chat box, the links, and then you can find everything. Actually, then I want to thank Femke and Kobe, of course, for sharing their precision insight. Many thanks for joining us today. It was really great hearing all the great stories. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, great. And then also to all the attendees, thank you for watching. And I'm looking forward to talking to you next time and welcoming you to one of the IMA events, virtually or in person across Europe and further. Good luck and see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.